Welcome to Let's Talk AI, Trust, Innovation, People, a show powered by EY.ai, where we unravel the fascinating world of artificial intelligence and its impact on business. Now, there's been a ton of hype over the last few months about how businesses of every kind will be transformed by generative AI. And while most of that talk has been long on speculation and maybe short on detail about real functioning business solutions, I think many companies have already begun to implement professional-grade generative AI solutions that are rapidly setting the standard for what the future of this tech will hold. My next guest is a true luminary in the field of AI and has certainly seen this unfold. Kavi Pather is EY Africa's AI and Advanced Analytics leader. Kavi, great to have you on the show again, and it's amazing to think how much this AI conversation has changed since we last spoke a year ago.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Great to be here with you.
Now, in today's business landscape, where I think businesses are battling with high inflation, high interest rates, load shedding, just keeping the lights on, why should AI innovation be at the top of the agenda?
You know, Michael, the best way to explain it, I think, is I've always really loved a quote by Steve Jobs, where he compared the computer to a bicycle for the mind. As it makes all of us more efficient and effective. And I think to extend that analogy, I think if the computer is a bicycle for the mind, I think AI might be the automobile for the mind. I think just as the computer has found ubiquity in society, you know, in business, made its way into every facet of our lives, and really changed the world irrecognizably. I think AI similarly promises to enact a similar kind of change in the world. And for me, that's why this technology is maybe different from other emerging technology. But this has always been the promise of AI. So you're very right to ask, you know, why now and what's different this time? Looking beyond the hype, I do think there's fundamental reasons for it to be, you know, very high on the agenda. And first is efficiency and productivity gains. You know, language models and generative AI in particular enable new kinds of abilities and new kinds of automation. So the ability to automate processes in business, I think, you know, just like ChatGPT has shown us, the usefulness of a chatbot or a co-pilot, so to speak, will improve productivity for, you know, millions of knowledge workers all over the world. And I think, you know, efficiency and productivity very high on the business agenda right now, given the economic cycle and where we are. We're probably in for, you know, some tough times ahead, cost pressures building in many businesses. I think secondly, you know, there's a much lower barrier to entry. Implementing your own version of ChatGPT, for example, in a modern enterprise is not that difficult. There are many organizations looking at that and actually doing it. But I think, you know, one subtle point here is also that in the past, there was an onerous requirement of AI, and that was you needed tons of training data. You needed to train your own model in order to use it. And what these foundational models and large language models have shown us is that you can now essentially leverage off of a pre-trained model. You don't need your own data to use ChatGPT, and there are many applications of generative AI where you can get away with much less data. And so I think this makes it a lot more appealing. And then finally, you know, I think there's always the promise or the likelihood of new business models in many industries. I think we're only at an early stage of really understanding all of the applications of this technology. And I really like the Uber story as a case study, for example. You know, Uber was made possible by the iPhone. But when the iPhone came out, I don't think anyone was looking at it and thinking, wow, this is really going to disrupt the taxi industry. You know, and it was only 2 years later when Uber and the other ride-hailing apps were first founded, and it completely changed that industry. And so I think, you know, for many industries and many businesses, that will be the journey here as well. And so it's important to keep an eye out for both the threats and the opportunities in that competitive landscape.
Very interesting. Efficiency, a big driver, as you say, for business, as well as the barriers coming down, and obviously that disruptive potential. I was chatting to Michael Jordan about when they announced the launch of their AI fund. They're going to be investing in businesses that seize that potential, not necessarily in the guys who are building the large language models, the big players like OpenAI pouring billions into AI. And, speaking of that, they've got access to ginormous data sets, and they're recruiting the best minds out there. Can companies outside the tech realm ever stand a chance in this AI race, or are we just going to be kind of AI takers?
I think that's a very good question, and we have to be clear what we mean by AI. When I think of AI in practice, I think of a collection of technologies: machine learning, speech and audio recognition, computer vision, robotics, and others. And each one has its own dynamics. I think what's fair to say is that big tech will likely be responsible for the most widespread and fundamental models, just like we've seen with the large language models like ChatGPT. And I don't think many companies can really compete in that space, given the billions of dollars of investment it takes to kind of build one of these models. But not all companies need to develop AI. They can strategically adopt and customize models for their own use. And I think this is going to be especially true for the language models and generative AI, which are currently very expensive to train, but also true for open source models, of which there's a growing ecosystem of potential options. But then the other thing I would say is that, niche and specific applications of AI can actually be more valuable than broad ones. And this is where many companies, potentially hold a competitive advantage. I think unique data sets that many corporates and enterprises possess can be leveraged to develop a competitive advantage. The example of this, of course, is like a credit scoring model that a banking institution might develop using its own proprietary data, but perhaps supplementing it with other external data, and that really is the competitive advantage they can build.
I often think of AI as this key that unlocks this data vault that companies have been sitting on, and this vast resource. And for years, I'd be presenting and facilitating at tech conferences and talking about data being the new oil. But it's how do you refine that oil? How do you turn it into something valuable? And I think this is that inflection point that is putting the keys into individual company hands. If you're not doing it, you're probably being left behind. Diving into the business mechanics now. Where should companies be channeling their AI innovation efforts? Is it operations? Is it marketing? Maybe somewhere unexpected?
I'm a firm believer that innovation should be done in the context of strategy. And so for me, the real question is, how might AI help us to move the needle on each of our strategic objectives? And I think this is different in every company's case, because of course, every company's strategy is different. But a trap that I think I see many falling into, and in fact, I've definitely been guilty of myself, is looking for interesting use cases, which turn out to be really marginal in the bigger picture. I think we need to think big, think strategically, even if we are just starting with a simple proof of concept. And I think the real challenge lies in understanding what is possible with the technology, something that we're only beginning to really understand, and then marrying it with the objectives of the overall organization. And I think that will give you a clue as to where to start leveraging this kind of technology for your organization.
Yeah, it has to be a strategic conversation. I was chatting to Jen recently about how your organization is approaching this, just starting with that base level of fundamentally understanding what the technology is all about and ensuring that all employees have that understanding. And from there, you can start to see maybe where the use cases are. But let's pull back the curtain. Can you give us some tangible, sort of groundbreaking examples of AI in action right now, today? What are some of the use cases that you are seeing?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the traditional use cases are well understood. What's really interesting is the new generative AI use cases. And as I've said, we're still starting to learn, all about those. But two areas I'll highlight, which I particularly see generative AI in particular making a difference, is firstly the customer service side of things. So having a chatbot like ChatGPT connected up to the organization's own systems and knowledge base means that a call center agent has at their fingertips a lot of the information that used to take them a lot longer to look up or log into on various systems. And I think that means a lot more efficiency, a lot less time with the customer on hold, and a lot more responsiveness. So really making a difference in that world. But even just beyond, that particular application, being able to transcribe not just a sample of customer interactions, but every single one, to really understand how your contact centers are engaging with your customers, but also then to provide very personalized feedback to every single contact center employee on how they might improve in dealing with customers. And the list in customer service and contact centers definitely goes on. There are a lot of applications in that space. The second area, I think, is actually software development, interestingly enough. I was talking to Microsoft not that long ago, and they confirmed a statistic that 42% of all new code is actually generated by AI today. And that means that, the productivity gains for developers are enormous. I've been reading some studies that have suggested perhaps even 100%. That is a significant development, especially given that many organizations have software development and system development as a real bottleneck in their environment. But I think those are the two big areas that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, that accords with the conversation I was having with Kavi Pather, the CEO of Capitec, at their results recently. He relayed that around 24-25% of all calls in their contact center are now being handled by some form of artificial intelligence, and he only sees it growing from there. What are the areas on the other side of this, you always taught to invert, to stay away from? Because surely AI isn't the answer everywhere or for every problem or to everyone in every circumstance. So, where are the potential pitfalls or dragons here?
Absolutely. Look, I think eventually it will actually make its way into almost every area of business where we employ people, and even beyond. But I think the real question is one of timing right now. I think there are areas where it's probably a little bit early or a little bit more difficult to apply artificial intelligence and even the new generative AI models. I think, if I were to call out a few, AI shouldn't replace human intuition right now. So emotionally sensitive areas, potentially, medical care or psychological care, for example. But then there are a number of areas similarly in business where human touch is very important. Secondly, I would say, highly regulated spaces. So healthcare, again, giving financial advice, for example, is likely to be frowned upon by regulators as that area of regulation needs time to catch up and adapt to these new capabilities. And then finally, I would say anywhere where we're trying to completely automate decision making. I think, even the latest generative AI models are not quite there, and you still need to have a human in the loop. So those are areas where it's a little bit trickier. But given the pace of development, I think, in sometime in the future, we'll even start talking about some of these.
Yeah, and I guess, as we've spoken about in the past, there is always some kind of bias depending on the data set that's been used to train the models, and you have to be really careful when it comes to highly regulated industries that doesn't then influence outcomes, be it credit scoring, be it providing medical advice. But there's also a view going around that AI is a tough nut to crack when it comes to innovation. Why is this? Why is innovating with AI proving to be such a challenge, given that it is a technology that seems so well suited for innovating and for disrupting the way we traditionally do things?
No, absolutely. It's a little bit of a paradox. And having worked with several organizations, innovating with this technology, I'll share a few things that I've seen and even some mistakes that I've definitely made myself. Um, the first reason I think is that there is a little bit of a hammer looking for a nail happening here. Some executive gets the idea that they need to implement some form of AI, and we're all of a sudden starting to look for use cases rather than starting with the business problem first. And I think that's always dangerous territory. I think there's a specialized knowledge problem. So the people who really understand the technology and its capability tend not to be the people on the front lines of business, dealing with the day-to-day problems. And similarly, those dealing with the day-to-day problems really understand the business problems, but maybe are not quite up to speed with all the latest capabilities of AI. And so you really need to get all the stakeholders around the table in the room when you're innovating, and also then find ways of helping them communicate with each other so that we can uncover both sides of that dilemma. I think one of the other things that I see when companies try and innovate with AI is this anthropomorphization, which is really the tendency to think that human intelligence or human ability is the ultimate end goal that we're aiming for when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I think that's a trap. While it is capable of doing some of the things we're doing, and in some cases perhaps even better than humans can do, I think the capabilities of AI are so much more than that. We need to think about, adjacent intelligences, so to speak. I'll give you an example. I was reading a paper the other day where a team of researchers had used the Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi interference patterns to reconstruct the contents of a room. So almost turning every Wi-Fi router into a camera. Now that's not something that we even have a human ability to do. And so looking for use cases like that, I think are where the real innovation will come from. I think also AI is risky and uncertain. If you ask ChatGPT a question and I ask the same question, we'll get two different answers. And for a lot of artificial intelligence applications, that's true. So you have to really thoroughly test it, at scale. And it's very important, therefore, to make sure that all of your stakeholders are trusting the AI that you start to build. And so all of those, I think, are some of the real challenges when trying to innovate and come up with something new in this space, which make it particularly tricky.
Now, trust, I mean, that's such a key word, and it really piques my curiosity. I was facilitating a conference for business accountants recently, and that was probably one of the big issues that they raised, was an issue around trust. Can I trust putting my client's data into one of these AI applications, and can I trust that it's safe? Can I trust that this data isn't going to be misappropriated, that kind of thing? Are risk and governance not maybe stifling the very innovation that we're trying to achieve with AI? How do we strike a balance?
That's a very good question. And look, my view is that actually when it comes to this technology, building trust is a key enabler. I think the less trust there is, the less people and society will let the technology do. There'll be more limitations put on it. And I like to point out that, before we had ChatGPT, there were actually a number of similar kinds of chatbot technologies released into the world. And quite a number of them were very quickly shut down. There was a famous one, Porte, which started saying very inappropriate things on Twitter and didn't last 24 hours. And so I think, the lesson from OpenAI actually is that they didn't just create a groundbreaking technology. They were also smart enough to have all of the governance and belts and braces around it to make it real world ready. And I think there's a lesson in that for everyone. And so what you have to try and do is build trust in from the beginning, and make sure you've got appropriate risk and governance. Obviously, as you say, striking the balance between stifling the innovation. But it can be as simple and as quick as doing a self-assessment for risk and governance before you start any proof of concept, for example. And in many cases, that is actually what we do these days.
Yeah. Again, it puts the human at the center. You know, we're talking about AI, we're talking about technology, but talking about that human element, isn't all of this AI talk a little bit lofty without the right talent to back it up? And even if you do have the people, how do you foster a culture of innovation with this tech?
I think that's a very good point. And this is a challenge now, you know, more than it ever was. I think technical skills are exceedingly in scarce supply, and not just data scientists. You know, all of the related technical fields and job roles like AI engineers and data engineers, you know, and the like. So I think, you know, it is a real challenge for many businesses. We really have no choice but to train people, you know, and fortunately there are lots of people who are keen to enter this field. But you know, it's incumbent upon organizations to provide the right kind of training. The second thing I'll say is that it's not actually just about the technical skills. You know, I think everyone needs to engage in AI if organizations are to be successful. Everyone will be using some form of ChatGPT or a co-pilot, and it really will take you know, a varied group of people across the organization to really identify all of the interesting use cases that we can you know, go and implement AI in to improve our businesses. And so I think really activating the entire organization and getting everyone involved is a really important facet of any AI strategy.
Again, it sounds great. It sounds great kind of in a PowerPoint presentation as a consultant going up to the board. But the hurdles, given all the hurdles of AI, what's the game plan? If I look and say, right, I really see that if I'm not looking at this opportunity, if I'm not thinking about this strategically, the odds are I am going to be left behind. So I have to start thinking about this. How should companies navigate this and dream up those game-changing AI applications or even revolutionary business models?
Absolutely. I like to keep it simple, and my personal view on this is you know, the old adage of start small, think big, and scale quickly. So starting small, what I see and what is probably the correct approach for many organizations is thinking about the enablement. So how do I get a version of a language model, for example, that all my employees can use? How do I put in the right kinds of risk and governance so that when we are developing proof of concepts or new use cases, we don't fall foul and it's built in from the beginning? And how do I start training everyone in the organization to recognize those use cases? I think automation is a good place to start with some of this because the use cases are easier to identify. But then I think we do need to think big. As I said, you know, consider the strategy, really push the boundary when it comes to those innovative use cases, because there are probably some disruptive business models waiting to be discovered. And then, you know, scaling quickly is really about paving the way and having a clear roadmap on how to get there and learning quickly, correcting and moving forward. So at a high level, I would say that has to be the approach. Doing nothing is probably the only bad strategy at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often, you know, if you're going to start small, maybe start with a small internal process that you can automate, and then you can see the value internally to the organization before you think, well, okay, now how can we introduce this into a more front office, customer-facing, client-facing way? It does sound like it's going to be a fair cost and effort, though. And I'm sure that you get this all the time from the CFO who wants to know, will this tech deliver on the ROI that it promises?
Yeah, look, and I think the reality is we need to go into this wide-eyed. I think any kind of innovation certainly has a cost and requires a certain level of investment before you see any kinds of returns. I think, as I pointed out, you know, AI is particularly risky, which is why you want to start small. But like I said, you know, given what's happening in the competitive landscape, given how fast this technology is moving and developing, I really do believe the only bad strategy is doing nothing, you know, right now. And so every organization should be at least starting to think about what it means for them. The other things I would say is, you know, measuring ROI in financial terms shouldn't necessarily be the only metric to consider. You know, customer satisfaction, the inbuilt knowledge that we can start to build within the organization about how to experiment with this technology are all, you know, really valuable things to consider. And then, of course, being an early adopter can provide a competitive advantage in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, customer satisfaction and generally that leads to retention. And I think that's what businesses are trying to do in a very competitive, hyper-competitive landscape at the moment, certainly locally. Looking at the horizon now, and, you know, I was just recently watching a podcast with Lex Fridman and Mark Zuckerberg in the metaverse. It's amazing how much that technology has evolved. How close are we to a world where AI might call the shots? Is a Skynet Terminator future on the cards here?
Look, I think the reality is the future is really uncertain, and it's tempting to even extrapolate the journey that we've been on and make predictions about where we're going. But I think that we have to be careful given how fast things are moving and how we constantly see new announcements and new capabilities, which we don't fully understand the implications of today. I think what we do know is that we've seen a paradigm shift in the past year. I think the generative AI capabilities and the language models in particular have changed the game to a very real extent. I think, you know, if we look at what's happened with other AI technologies, the technology continues to develop at an incredible rate, and I think we've definitely seen that. It will probably surpass human ability in narrow tasks in a few years' time. So, for example, it may end up becoming better at summarizing research, you know, passing certain exams. But despite that, you know, AI will increasingly augment human ability rather than replace it. Certainly, that's what we've seen with other AI technologies that have emerged. And I think that will continue for the foreseeable future. I think it's important to also realize, you know, you mentioned the Terminator scenario. We're dealing with tools, not beings. And these tools are, while they are extremely capable, I think they're also very flawed and very fallible in very real ways. You know, just look at some of the really cutting edge chess or Go playing artificial intelligences, which, while being able to beat the #1 ranked player, are also fallible to very simple strategies which people have sort of uncovered. So I don't think we're anywhere near to that human level ability. My personal view is that I think we're a few paradigm shifts, you know, away from that. We certainly are not going to be able to say, "Hey, ChatGPT, go and cure cancer," and have it go off and do all the necessary research, you know, just yet. I also think that governance and ethics will remain key to unlocking the value. I think regulation is coming and will provide a challenge for some organizations, but it will also allow us to do a lot more with this technology. So I think broadly that's my personal view on where things are going. But I'll sum it up with the words of a colleague of mine who said, you know, what a time to be alive. It really is an exciting few years that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with that more in terms of embracing what the technology can do. As a financial journalist, it's made me so much more productive in transcribing interviews like this. I can use sonics.ai. It's fully transcribed with just a couple of words that might need tweaking within a couple of minutes. I mean, that would generally, with my typing speed, take me at least half an hour, 45 minutes. Then you can put it into a chat GPT. It gives you the SEO. So it is currently making my life a whole lot easier, and I'm sure many other businesses are discovering these new use cases as they go. Well, that concludes our captivating conversation with Kavi Pather, EY Africa's AI and advanced analytics leader. Thank you, Kavi, for shedding light on the complexities and the potential of AI in the business world.
Thanks, Michael.